What is the strangest mystery that is still unsolved? The lost A-bomb off the coast of America, which the US government said not to worry about in the 50s and tried to cover up, was dumped in the ocean in an aviation accident, and it's still lost to this day. 100x more powerful than what was dropped in Japan. There was this other bomb that fell out of a bomb bay above the US. They told everyone it was fine, but later revealed that 3 out of 4 safety thingies had been actuated. Only one more and there would have been an explosion. I can't find it, but it should be in here along with other accidents, etc. I remember seeing a video about a woman that after getting divorced started getting stalked and assaulted in her own house. Every time police would arrive, no one more than her was at the scene. Sometimes she would appear with bruises. Once she appeared with a screwdriver through her hand. This happened so many times that police started ignoring her calls after the investigation on her husband, and on the case left no suspects. 3 months later she disappeared just to reappear next to a highway in the middle of the desert, miles away from her house, with her hands tied, dead. Autopsy later confirmed she was beaten to death. Creepiest shit I know. Edit. The case is the death of Cindy James. Some of the details are different, but it's all detailed there. Her hands and feet had been tied behind her back. Police believed that her death was either an accident or suicide. Lot of that going around this thread. The Oakville blob. In 1994, there was a rainstorm in Oakville, WA. Only the raindrops were a strange clear substance that had the consistency of jello. Lots of people experienced flu-like symptoms after coming into contact with it, and people's dogs and cats all over the city were dying. When a local hospital ran a lab test on the substance after one of the patients suggested it was found that whatever this mysterious rain was, it had human white blood cells in it. Sometime after that, a sample was also sent to the Washington State Health Laboratory, where it was being researched by epidemiologist Mike McDowell. After he determined that it was man-made and speculated that it was some sort of matrix for transporting viruses, bacteria, the samples suddenly went missing from the containment facility, and his supervisor told him not to ask any questions. There are no known samples of the stuff anywhere today, despite being sent to several different facilities by various Oakville residents. So yeah, I'd personally say that this was clearly some sort of bioweapon test run, but by whom? I'd like to give the US government the benefit of the doubt here and assume it wasn't us testing something like that on our own citizens, but if it wasn't, why would it have been covered up like that? And you'd think an event like this would be a lot less obscure. Also, even if it being a bioweapon seems super obvious, how the heck did whoever dispersed it manage to make it rain over an entire city for several days? You give them too much credit. There have been several incidents that have come to light in the last few years or decades that involve the US Gov directly testing weapons and or medicine on the unwitting and unsuspecting populace. Operation Sea Spray in San Francisco comes to mind. Also, they did something similar in the Chicago subways at some point. Also Shad, where they sprayed toxic substances on ships with thousands of unprepared sailors and boat. Edit. Wikipedia has an amazing list of the known bullshit the US Gov has pulled in this similar fashion. Unethical human experimentation in the United States. The Circleville Letters in 1976. Residents of the small city south of Columbus, Ohio began receiving handwritten, sinister and graphic letters. Each letter included secret and dark details about their personal lives. One resident received a ton of letters, accusing her of various unsavory acts. The author warned the resident that he had been keeping an eye on her home, as well as her comings and goings. The resident was horrified and tried to keep the letters a secret until her husband began receiving them. The attacks on the family continued, with large posters appearing around town spreading rumors about their 12-year-old child. One day in 1977, the husband left the house after receiving a call from who he thought was writing the letters. A few minutes later, the husband was found dead at the end of the street, dead behind the wheel. The sheriff had ruled it a homicide when he realized that a single shot had been fired before the accident, but there was no evidence that the husband was shot at the site. The sheriff found the husband was twice the legal limit and ruled it a drunk driving accident. The letters began once again, this time accusing the sheriff of covering up the true nature of the death. The letters also accused the sheriff of mishandling an investigation into the county coroner who had been accused of other grotesque acts. The harassment continued, this time with signs along the road, and in 1983, the original resident who had been accused of having an affair pulled over to remove a sign. During the effort to remove the sign, she discovered a box was attached and inside of it was a small pistol. The gun was part of a booby trap designed to fire when the sign was removed. Paul Fresau was arrested and given 25 years, but one small problem. The letter writing continued even after Fresau was put in jail. In a new batch of letters, the author had promised to dig up the grave of a deceased baby and mail the bones to the police in the case of another potential affair turned murder. Hundreds of residents continued to receive personal letters until 1994 when everything stopped. It's likely the letter sender passed away. You might try to find people in that town that passed in that time frame. That is also interestingly when the Unsolved Mysteries episode on this aired. Not that it means anything but might scare them off. Though I do suppose that have started back up again. You're probably right that after 17 years whoever it was probably passed. This dude got lost in the catacombs, and they found camera footage of his journey, but at some point he drops the camera and just starts to run. As far as I know, nobody has found out WTF happened to him. He probably panicked, heard a rat, something fell, and ran in an intentionally erratic pattern because he thought something was chasing him. Then he got lost on his way back. I remember seeing this video on YouTube of this guy who went to explore an old Civil War era mine in the US. He reached the end and made his way back. And about halfway through really loud whispers suddenly came from where the back of the mine and he bolted out of there. Really spooky and unexplained until someone in the comments noticed the whispers followed the exact cadence of a sentence he spoke about 5 seconds ago. So it probably was his own voice that got morphed and echoed back to him in a weird way. Spooky AF though. On the 19th of April, 1995, a truck bomb detonated outside the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. The explosion killed 168 in what was the deadliest terrorist attack on the United States until 9/11 to date. It still remains the deadliest act of domestic terrorism in the country. One of the lesser known things about this is the case of the missing leg. Investigators discovered the leg laying among the rubble and identified it belonging to Lakeisha Levy. The only problem was, she'd already been buried with both her legs. She was exhumed. Her severed leg was placed in her coffin while the other leg was taken to the FBI laboratory for identification. Since it had been embalmed, a DNA sample was unable to be obtained. The extra left leg, which had been mistakenly buried with Levy, is suspected to belong to an unidentified 169th victim, whose body had mostly disintegrated in the blast. This has led people to suspect there was an additional terrorist involved, even though perpetrators Timothy McVeigh and Terry Nichols had been convicted, with 2 others later identified as accomplices. So who was the possible additional bomber? They still remain unidentified now 25 years after the attack. McVeigh defense team suggests real bomber was killed in blast. I remember this bombing so well due to all the coincidental connections I had with it. My uncle worked across the street in an office with a window view. He took that day off and his office was covered in glass from the explosion. His son was one of the federal marshals that escorted Timothy McVeigh back to OKC and fingerprinted him. My GF at the time was questioned by the FBI because she was buying dog food at the coop at approximately the same time they were buying the fertilizer for the bomb. So, totally unrelated, how many legs do you have? A. Strange but not creepy mystery, the disappearance and reappearance of Lawrence Joseph Barder. He was a cookware salesman from Akron, Ohio who went missing in 1957. He went fishing, a storm hit, and his boat was found the next day with some damage. He was in debt and in trouble with the IRS, and his wife was about to have their third child. 4 days later, John Fritz Johnson appeared in a bar in Omaha, Nebraska. Spoiler, it's Larry Barder. Fritz was known for his wild personality. He attracted local attention for sitting atop a flagpole for 30 days to raise money for polio. He became a radio announcer and a TV sports director. He drove around in a hearse with a bar and became a minor celebrity in Omaha. By no means was avoiding attention. In 1964, a cancerous tumor was found behind his left eye and it had to be removed. In 1965, Fritz was in Chicago for a tournament and an acquaintance from Akron recognized him, despite the eye patch, and confronted him, and then brought Barder's niece to take a look. She agreed it was her uncle, and confronted him about it as well. Fritz denied it but found it humorous. Fritz's fingerprints were then matched to Larry Barder's military records and it was confirmed. Fritz Johnson always maintained he had no memory of his former life as Larry Barder. Psychiatrists examined him and believed he was telling the truth even though he had financial reasons to assume a new identity, and the concept of someone forgetting their past and entirely constructing a different one with false memories is hard to fathom. It is also considered a possibility that the eye tumor had something to do with it. He ultimately died in 1966 from the eye tumor and it was never determined conclusively whether he was lying or not. I am fascinated by this case, especially because he had an entire change in personality, an entire life backstory as Fritz, and he made no effort to live a low profile to avoid discovery. I found this case while looking through the Wikipedia category of people who have faked their own deaths, though it's debatable if this guy should even be on there, all of which are great stories. The human brain is an amazing thing. It is equal parts frightening and impressive. Another one is Colonel Philip Shue's death on the 16th of April, 2003. 54-year-old Colonel Philip Shue left his Texas home and headed to work. 2 hours later, he was found dead in his car, an apparent victim of a car crash. The car was caved in on the driver's side and Philip suffered major head trauma as a result. He was killed instantly. This is where it gets weird. Philip had a tear in his t-shirt under his fatigues. There, they could see a 6-inch vertical gash in his chest. Above the entrance to the 6th gash were at least 5 scratch marks, which the autopsy report said were consistent with hesitant marks. Both his nipples had been removed with surgical precision. The 5th digit on his left hand had been amputated and his left ear had been lacerated down to the bone. Duct tape was dangling from both of his wrists and the top of his boots. It was ruled a suicide. Perhaps not the absolute strangest, but in March of 2020, the Windows market share for the long discontinued Windows XP skyrocketed by about 10% in China. This spike in Windows XP use for just 1 month is for unknown reasons. Some people think the Chinese government could have been looking for security flaws in the operating system to take advantage of. After all, lots of sensitive government equipment still runs on Windows XP. I'm pretty sure even some equipment, like machining equipment, used to make parts that are used by the military run Windows XP. Yep, XP and ME are ubiquitous. They're only connected to Railon, so I guess that keeps us safe. It's actually really annoying when the clocks change in the spring and fall, because they still use the old dates for daylight savings on the equipment I've used. We could change the time and date at the control panel. As for your point about the ALON connection is valid point, however all our machines were connected to the office computers via Railon and those computers had all sorts of prints, both military and civilian, so there were a lot more entry points to the system for us. The suicide of Lavina Johnson, a black female US Army private who was found shot to death inside a burning tent with a broken nose. black eyes, broken teeth, raped and acid burns on her genitals in July 2005. Asami ruled her death as suicide. There was a whole podcast episode about this on Crime Junkies. And it seriously swayed me into no longer looking into going into the military. What a... You can't serve your country honorably without potentially falling victim to being raped and or murdered by your own damn comrades. This infuriates me. Women in the Asami are more likely to be raped by their fellow officers than killed in combat. The Miyazawa family. Just listen to the Casa File podcast on this and it has my mind blown. Someone entered the family home around 11:30 p.m, killed everyone, ate some ice cream, took a nap, pooped and didn't flush, changed clothes and left like 8 hours after the crime. 20 years on and we don't know who or why would there not be a load of DNA from the killer in the poop shitloads. An unsolved murder of an entire family in Japan which to this day remains unsolved despite DNA evidence indicating the ancestry of the killer, a sand sample left by the killer which was traced back to the California deserts near Edwards AFB, and even sesame seeds in the killer's stool. Very interesting, especially the origin of the sand. I presume killer is not Japanese, but the authorities are not allowed to search international database just like that. What if the killer was a military official? Perhaps. That's something that would also make this case go cold. My thoughts as well. A biracial member of the American military, deployed to or perhaps living in Japan. To me his behavior is highly desanitized. Killing was not passionate, and it does not seem planned. Far back. He obviously killed the whole family so he could have the place for himself that night, and it seems as a pro's job for that matter. Just chilling around, taking a dump and not flushing, aware enough he will not be caught for some reason. Poor family, it seems as if they were collateral damage, wrong place in the wrong time on the path of a cold-blooded pro-killer. Perhaps the killer was on the run, and they might not be the only victims, but the Japan investigators do not have enough to link them together. So many possibilities, no wonder it is unresolved. Edit, wondering what was the internet search history. Literally any dig site in archaeology, even the ones that are just garbage and potsherds, are fascinating if you try to really picture the people behind them, what they thought and felt. Actually, garbage probably tells you more about a people than anything else. Really archaeology major, but my favorite is Chowvad Cave. If you have a chance, watch Werner Herzog's documentary Cave of Forgotten Dreams. I think it's still on Netflix. It has some of the most stunning cave art in the world, which almost certainly had some kind of profound significance, and we don't and will likely never know what it is. Moreover, there's evidence that the cave was abandoned for thousands of years and later returned to, only for the returnees to continue to make paintings in the exact same style and, possibly, for the exact same reasons. There is so much to be seen in these figures. There's a portrait of an animal tossing its head that looks like one of the world's earliest explorations of stop motion or sequential art. When I look at it I can feel the will of the painter, who wanted so much to convey this sort of motion. There are also the footprints of a boy, who arrived much later to the cave than its original users, whose marks appear to be contemporary with the paw prints of a wolf. It's hard to say now, according to Cave of Forgotten Dreams, whether they walked together, whether they walked 20 years apart, whether they were friends or whether the wolf was stalking the boy. But I read a blog post by a professional hunter and tracker, who looked at the footage of the prints from the film and said that they likely walked together. I wonder what they were thinking. If the boy had some knowledge of what he would find there, or if he was simply exploring a cave and found some of the greatest art in human history. In Chowvad, there is also the solution to a mystery. Until the discovery of Chowvad Cave, paleontologists were unsure as to where the cave lions had manes. On the cave walls there is an illustration of a cave lion with visible testicles and no mane, settling that debate. If you would like to visit the cave, there is a 3D tour available here. I love the passion you have for archaeology. I've never thought about it in this light. Thank you for enlightening me.